There's a million ways to do trees in 3D, and recently for a project I explored many options, and in this video series I want to share my 3 favorite ways to do trees in 3D. Let's go for it. So let's get started with the Grove. The Grove is a Blender add-on that actually grows trees instead of just modeling them. It kind of like references nature, so it's kind of more simulation than modeling in a way. But it's kind of flexible in how you can tweak it. On their website, they have some resources about how trees naturally grow. So it's the flow of water, sugar, and hormones. It's quite complex stuff, to be honest, but luckily we don't need to know it all. There's just a few buttons we can hit and the software does all the magic for us. It's under €39 to get started with the plugin, and all the twigs, so the bark and the twig come separately. And the twigs are €9 each, but you get a discount when you buy 6. Bit of a starter's fee on this one, but I think it's one of the most realistic tree growing softwares out there. So I think it's definitely worth it. So without further ado, let's dive into Blender and start exploring the tool. So in Blender, we have a new scene. Let's get rid of the cube. And first you need to install it. So when you buy it, you'll get a zip, and you can just install it here by just hitting install, and then you have the Grove here, so you need to activate it, then you need to point it to your twigs folder, and you need to point it to your barks folder, and then you're ready to go. And when you hit N, now Grove 10 should pop up in this side menu. So let's add a Grove object. So the first thing you'll see is there's presets. So this decides how your tree will grow. It gets the characteristics of the preset you can see here. For now, I kind of want to simulate something that's more like a conifer, fir type of tree. And then you select your twigs. This is where you point your plugin to. And I got a scotch that I would like to grow. And here you see the density of the leaves. I think this is how long the leaves live. This is the scale of the whole object, and the cycles is how many years you grow the tree in every cycle. So as I said before, this is tree growing software, this is not tree modeling software. So how we get a tree is we need to hit grow, because now it's 0 years. And when we hit grow, because we have 5 cycles, we added 5 years to our tree. And it's now 1.6 meters. As you can see, we have a little tree here. And that's kind of the bulk of it. You can just very easily, grow trees, add some more years to it. But there's a couple of other things we can do to get the model right. So the first of it is we can bend the tree. So when you hit bend, you get this interface, and you bend it from a point you select. And when you hit spacebar, it will apply the bend. So if I want to do a bit more bend in the higher part, I can click here, and then I can bend it a bit more, hit spacebar. And if I want this top bit to be really curved, I can do a bit more, and so on. And when you hit escape, it goes back to the normal menu. And now you can see we have a slightly bended tree. Then another thing we can do is we can prune the tree. So we can cut off little bits of the tree. And here you can see we now get rid of some of the bits. So if you don't like this twig there, you can just cut it off, get rid of it, and that's it. And then another trick we can do, if we want it back, we can draw the tree. So we can draw some extra branches, and now you see we have some extra material here. And that's it for the basic growing. There are a lot more options down here, which you can get into, but I don't think it's really necessary for most of the things. So let me quickly show you one way how you can grow multiple trees as well. So if we get rid of all these, add a Grove. Let's add our presets again. And basically in the plant section, you can tell the Grove how to grow multiple trees. So you start with the amount of trees, then the space between them. Because I want to grow bigger trees, I want a bit more space between them, maybe like 5 meters or something. And then you can randomize the location a bit more. And then you have different layouts. So this is a clumping layout. So it kind of clumps together around the center point. But you can also have them on islands. So that works better for different types of layouts. You can place them in a ring as well, and obviously you can increase the randomize. And the last one is rows, which are quite interesting for agricultural models, because normally these trees on a farm are planted in this kind of grid, and this layout works quite well for that. And all that's left to do is now hitting grow, and it should load for a little bit. And now you can see we have a whole bunch of trees, and they're all slightly different. And so it adds up in terms of time because you're growing more trees. So the more trees you add, the slower it will get. But it's a really nice, easy way to just generate a whole patch of forest or a patch of trees. It works quite nicely. I'm gonna delete it for now to keep the scene light. Get rid of that, and I'll just add a new one. And another thing you need to know in terms of the model is the bark texture is down here. So we can't really see it now because we're in this shading mode. But if I set my render engine to cycles, let's do GPU, and I hit viewport shading, I can now see the materials. And you can see it looks really realistic already, even though it's still clearing up the noise. But this bark texture is not really what I'm after. So here I can select all these different ones. So maybe let's go for fur texture. And that's kind of something I'm looking for a bit more. So that's where you have the variations. You can set the UV to repeat a couple of times more if you want the texture to be a bit smaller. I found 2 works quite well in most cases, but again, it's up to you. And if we go back to our regular shading now, the last thing I want to show is how to animate these trees. And so animation is super simple. You just hit the animate button and you set the wind to a certain value. I quite like this menu that you can just point it to a direction and then set the speed from left to right or up to down, depends which direction you're going. And then the turbulence, you could turn it down. I found you need quite low values for these, otherwise it looks like the trees in a storm. And then we just hit animate. And now we'll go through frame by frame and set load for a second. Now you can see we're in this little preview kind of mode. If we're happy with it, we can just close this panel and the animation will be applied. And as you can see, this also has some really nice natural movement. I find sometimes when there's tree or grass animation, especially in Unreal Engine, it just looks like a noise shader on top of some objects. But to me, this looks a lot more natural, like, I don't know, it looks how real trees behave in the wind. So yeah, that's it for this one. If you want to export to different 3D software, it's a good idea to select your tree, hit object, and then you need to make the instances real. So the way this software works so efficiently and quick is that it utilizes particle systems in order to instance all these leaves, and it makes it really light and fast. But if you want to export it to other software, you need to make the instances real, so they're not instances anymore. So let's go ahead and do that. And now you can see we have all these twigs applied in as real objects, I guess. It's a lot, that's why it's a little bit slow at the moment. Plus, it doesn't help I have animation in the scene. So for all these objects we need animation, so it makes it quite heavy. So maybe if you're not rendering in Blender, maybe animation might not be the best idea. But now you can just export it. And depending on what software you use, you can then export the whole project. So you want to select everything here, select objects, and you can just export in your favorite data type. I'm going to export as Alembic because I want to show you how to import this in Houdini as well. You can use different formats for different software. Alright, so navigate to your folder of choice, and I can just call this models Scotch Pine version 1. I don't want any animation, so I'm just going to do from frame 1 to 1. I use instancing is a good idea. Export hair particles, that's all fine. I think all these settings should work. I'm going to leave the scale to 1, and then we hit export Alembic. Alright, so once you've exported your whole tree model, you want to navigate to your twigs folder, and there is a Blender twig file in there, and this you want to export as well because we need to use that for instancing in other software. So you basically grab this Scotch Pine model and you can then export this as an Alembic as well. So give it a name in the folder you want. Again, let's set the frames from 1 to 1, and the rest of the settings are fine as they are. Then export Alembic. Alright, and then in Houdini, the way I like to import these trees is with OD tools. So if you come into your OD tools, you can go to the Grove Tree Alembic Import, point it to your main tree, not your twig, and here you can dive in. The only thing we need to set is these twig values. So you have different kind of leaves. So you have some dead leaves, apical, lateral, and the first thing we want to do is we want to load in our Alembic model. And so let's drop down Alembic, point it to the twig model you've exported from Blender, and this one. Let's double check, that looks right. And what we can then simply do is we can add a custom twig, say custom apical twig. You just drag in this Alembic model. I should probably rename this a bit better, but all right. And what we can then do in the apical path value, we can just set it to the Scotch pine twig. And there we go. We now have our leaves back on the tree. And what you can do is you can drop down materials down here, and it will then use it for instancing. If you're using Redshift, it's probably good to export a proxy of this twig first, and then copy that proxy to point, export a proxy of just the tree model, and then a combined proxy. It's a bit of a hassle, but once you do it, you have a really nice optimized model. I think if you're using Mantra or Karma, there's no real need to. And there's a couple of cool features of this as well. So you can, for example, export the skeletal lines. So as you can see here, you can create animation quite easily with Vellum on it. So you don't need your animation from Blender. And if you don't have these tools, you can just simply import and point it to the model. And now you can see we have a whole tree in place. So now you can just append materials according to the path. So in the material node, you can just say add path is, and then use these names, and that way you can give them all separate materials. And that's it. Just a quick tutorial about how to use the growth. It's my favorite tree plugin. And in next week's tutorial, I'm gonna break down how to use Megascans trees, the new edition for Unreal. And if you like this content, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.